I had barely buckled my seatbelt in 1A when he appeared, glaring like I'd stolen his inheritance. "You don't belong here," he hissed, loud enough for the cabin to freeze. I said nothing. Not yet. Let him think I was just another black woman lucky to snag first class. Let him laugh, rant, and demand my removal. I'd moved before, to keep peace. But this time, I wasn't moving. Not an inch. He wanted war? I was the wrong woman. Because in exactly 12 minutes, the entire plane would know. I wasn't just a passenger. I was the one flying this jet. The hush in the first-class cabin was nearly sacred. Plush seats, soft jazz playing from unseen speakers, the air tinged with citrus and prestige. Naomi Carter eased into seat 1A, her posture precise, movements efficient. She wore a crisp white blouse, dark slacks, and no makeup. Her skin glowed naturally, her tightly coiled hair pulled into a neat low bun. No one would have guessed she was a commercial pilot, much less the youngest female African-American captain in Global Air's history. Except, of course, for the man who arrived 2 minutes later and decided her presence was unacceptable. "I believe there's been a mistake," said a deep, annoyed voice from the aisle. Naomi glanced up, meeting the sharp, pale eyes of a man in an expensively tailored navy suit. His hair was snow-white, perfectly parted. A gold pin gleamed on his lapel. Platinum Executive Member, Global Air. His name tag, affixed to a leather case he carried, read Douglas M. Whitmore. "This is seat 1A, Naomi said calmly. "Boarding pass?" she added, holding up hers without moving. Whitmore didn't look at the pass. Instead, his eyes swept over her, from her unadorned blouse to her modest shoes, down to the canvas carry-on tucked neatly beneath her seat. "No offense," he said, and then added something no less offensive. "But you don't look like someone who belongs here." A quiet shift spread across the cabin like ripples across glass. Passengers in nearby seats tilted their heads slightly, catching wind of a confrontation. Naomi felt their gazes, soft murmurs turning into heavy silence. One woman across the aisle pressed pause on her in-flight movie. Naomi held still. Her spine straightened, her breathing slowed. Whitmore turned to the flight attendant approaching them, smiling with manufactured courtesy. "I'd like to report a mistake. This passenger appears to have boarded incorrectly. I've been flying Global Air for 30 years and have never seen standards fall this far. It's unbecoming of the brand." The attendant, a young man with closely cropped blonde hair, looked nervously between them. "Sir, I can check your boarding pass if there's an issue." Naomi handed hers over first. The attendant scanned it quickly and nodded. "Seat 1A, confirmed." Whitmore didn't flinch. He thrust out his own pass, his lips tight. The attendant examined it longer. "Sir, this says seat 4C." Whitmore's voice sharpened. "There's been a mix-up. I always sit in 1A. Check the system again." "I already did, sir," the attendant replied, still professional but firmer. "Seat 1A was booked weeks ago." "I am a platinum executive," Whitmore snapped. "Do you understand what that means? I bring more value to this airline than half this plane combined. I shouldn't be subjected to visual inconsistency in first class." The insult landed hard. Naomi felt it in her chest, her limbs, her memory. Not because it was new, because it was old. Old as every time she'd been mistaken for the assistant instead of the leader, the passenger instead of the pilot. Old as the steady erosion of dignity women like her had to patch together piece by piece, flight by flight. Still, she said nothing. Whitmore turned toward the cabin. "Anyone else disturbed by this? A woman dressed like that in seat 1A? Is this the new Global Air standard?" The silence fractured. A man 2 rows back cleared his throat awkwardly. A woman beside him glanced away. No one spoke, but their silence said everything. The passengers weren't shocked. They were curious, observing, judging. Naomi became an object, a disruption to their comfort. She could feel it. The attendant gave her a look, not of pity, but of hesitance, as if silently asking, "Do you want me to escalate this?" Naomi blinked once and shook her head. "No problem," she said quietly. "Let him have the moment." Whitmore took it as a concession. "Good," he barked. "I'll take my rightful seat, and she can be reassigned, maybe business class, if that." "I'm not moving," Naomi added, her tone even but firm now. "And I won't be reassigned." Whitmore's jaw clenched. "Then get someone who will. Security, supervisor, I don't care." The attendant's voice rose slightly. "Sir, there is no issue with this passenger. She has the right seat, and we are about to taxi." "I'm not flying until this is resolved," Whitmore declared, sinking into the aisle seat next to her, arms crossed. "Either she moves, or I do." "Understood," Naomi murmured. She pressed the button on the armrest to summon a supervisor, but inside her, something deeper flickered. Not rage, not yet. Something colder, something older. "So this is how it begins again," she thought. Not in courtrooms, not in riots, but in seat 1A, where a man decided her presence was an eyesore to the brand. She looked out the window as the plane pulled slightly forward, then jolted to a stop. A minute later, a message rang through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an onboard issue, we will be returning to the gate for further instructions. We appreciate your patience." A slow murmur rose across the cabin. Naomi could feel it. The slight pivot in the passenger's interest. Now there was drama. Now it wasn't just a confrontation, it was a situation. Whitmore sat smugly, assuming the pilot's decision validated his protest. Naomi, still facing forward, allowed herself a breath. She had flown thousands of hours over continents, led emergency landings in monsoons, and trained dozens of new recruits. But nothing in her entire career felt heavier than this moment, being made small, publicly, by someone who thought she was disposable. And still, she said nothing. Let him have his tantrum. Let them look. They would all know soon enough. The seat he fought to take from her wasn't just any seat, and she wasn't just another woman in 1A. She was the one who'd earned it, who flew it. "I'll move," Naomi said softly, standing before anyone could stop her. The words slid from her mouth like cold steel, quiet but absolute. The flight attendant blinked in confusion, glancing at the digital manifest. "Miss Carter, you don't have to—" Naomi lifted her hand gently. "It's fine. Let's not delay everyone else. He clearly needs the seat more than I do." Whitmore smirked triumphantly, already gathering his things as if he had won some invisible prize. A few passengers nodded, others stared at Naomi with conflicted glances, some grateful, others indifferent. One or two avoided her eyes altogether. The attendant motioned toward an open seat in business class. Naomi followed him wordlessly down the narrow aisle, the eyes at her back burning like coals pressed into skin. She sat down in 4C, straightened her blouse, and exhaled deeply. Just a seat, she told herself. Not worth a scene, not worth a headline. But even she couldn't quite believe that lie. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, letting the vibration of the engines hum through her chest. As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, her mind slipped, uninvited, into memory. Not just any memory, the kind that nestles beneath the skin, where discipline and pain braid into identity. She was 9 years old, barefoot in the gravel lot behind the Carter compound, hands blistered from dragging a weighted sled across the dirt. Her father, Samuel Carter, stood in military fatigues beneath the blazing Georgia sun, arms crossed, eyes like gunmetal. Again. She had collapsed, knees bruised, throat dry. "Dad, please." His voice was quiet. "Do you want pity or strength, Naomi?" The other trainees, all boys at least 6 years older than her, had snickered behind her. "Let the little princess go play tea party," one of them whispered. She hadn't cried. Not that day. Not ever again, really. By the time she was 15, Naomi could strip and reassemble a Glock 19 blindfolded. By 16, she could outshoot any of the male recruits. By 18, she'd earned her private pilot's license, without ever telling her father she was learning. Not because he wouldn't support her, but because she needed to know. Could she do it without carrying his shadow? Samuel Carter wasn't just her father. He had been a legend, former national security advisor under 2 presidents, forced into retirement after a scandal that he insisted wasn't his doing. Betrayed, framed, silenced. Naomi had watched him crumble privately while maintaining public steel. She'd learned from him how to survive silence, how to keep your voice steady when your name was the headline, how to hold eye contact when a room full of people wanted you gone. Back in seat 4C, she opened her eyes. A thin crack of sunlight streamed through the window, reflecting off her hands. She clenched them gently. Douglas Whitmore hadn't humiliated her. Not really. He'd simply reminded her what the world expected. That dignity came with whiteness, with age, with male entitlement. She'd met men like him in every level of her career, some subtle, others obvious. The ones who asked if she was part of the flight crew, while she stood in uniform with 4 bars on her shoulder. The ones who told her she was a diversity hire. The ones who laughed when she parked her own private Cessna beside their jets at the Atlanta Executive Terminal. But she hadn't answered them then. She didn't answer now, because Naomi Carter never fought battles in the moment. She fought them with endurance, with data, with time, and with names. She opened the notebook from her bag, flipped to a half-written memo she'd been crafting for weeks. An internal audit of pilot diversity rates across all major commercial airlines. She had been compiling data quietly, sourcing whistleblower accounts anonymously. She hadn't decided when or how to publish it, but it was growing into something dangerous, something important. And after today, maybe it's time. The cabin lights dimmed. The captain announced the cruising altitude and weather conditions in a soft voice. Naomi listened absently, recognizing the cadence of a former Navy pilot. Good tone, tight phrasing, professional. Her hands itched for a control yoke. 1 more week, she reminded herself. Then simulator recertification. Then rotation back to cockpit duty. It was rare for a senior captain to take a full month off, but Naomi had needed the space, not for rest, for clarity. She glanced down the aisle toward first class. Whitmore sat in her seat, now his, sipping bourbon, gesturing animatedly to the flight attendant as if nothing had happened. Naomi felt no hatred. What she felt was clarity. This wasn't about 1A. It wasn't even about her. It was about every young girl with a pilot's dream who never got to board the plane. About every candidate passed over because she didn't fit the look. About the little girl inside her who once dragged a sled under the Georgia sun, while older boys mocked her for daring to believe she belonged. She looked out the window again, sky fading to pale amber as the plane crossed the Rockies. Tomorrow, she would be invisible again. But not today. Today, she would write. Today, she would remember. And soon enough, they would remember her name. Douglas Whitmore stretched his legs out confidently in seat 1A, adjusting the leather pillow behind his head like he had just conquered a minor kingdom. His smirk was subtle, but his posture screamed triumph. The cabin had returned to its hushed order, jazz playing faintly overhead, but the tension lingered like turbulence in still air. Naomi Carter sat in 4C, her new seat, wedged between 2 broad-shouldered men who seemed unaware, or perhaps uncaring, that she needed space. One man was already asleep, chin tucked to his chest, arms spilling over the armrests. The other flipped through a Wall Street Journal, the edges of his suit jacket brushing against her sleeve with every page turn. She folded her hands in her lap, nails pressed into her palm. A young woman seated diagonally behind Douglas subtly angled her phone. The screen glowed briefly before she tucked it into her tray table. Naomi caught the motion in the reflection of the window beside her, an angled glimpse of a camera lens aimed forward. Someone recorded it, she thought. The incident, the exchange, maybe more. It didn't bring comfort, just exposure. And exposure didn't guarantee justice. She stared forward as the plane completed its taxi and lifted into the air. The roar of takeoff vibrated through her chest, but the sound inside her mind was louder. The silence of complicity. No one had said anything. Not the man in 1B who had smiled politely at Douglas and then turned away. Not the woman across from Naomi who had watched the entire thing with wide eyes and said nothing. Not even the flight attendants, despite the visible discomfort on the younger one's face. Of course they hadn't. Whitmore wasn't just a frequent flyer. He was known. His account history probably lit up green in their system. VIP partner, investor, legacy donor. He's someone, Naomi thought bitterly. And I'm just a pilot out of uniform. The irony cut deep. She had worn the Global Air Captain's uniform for nearly 6 years. Her photo hung in their Atlanta headquarters hallway. Naomi Carter, first African-American female captain, Global Air, 2016. She had trained dozens of crew members, supervised emergency drills, and de-escalated real mid-air crises with calm, mathematical precision. And yet today, in civilian clothes, she was just an issue. The man beside her coughed loudly into his hand, then adjusted his seat and inadvertently bumped her elbow. He mumbled a half-hearted, "Sorry," not bothering to make eye contact. Naomi nodded slightly and returned to her silence. She glanced to the side, through the small oval window, and her throat caught. Clouds scattered beneath the plane like ghostly mountains, and between them, the glint of the sun on snow-dusted peaks. She had always loved this view. It was what made flying worth it. That perspective, that peace. But today, even that felt stolen. Her vision blurred slightly. She blinked hard. Once, twice. But the burn behind her eyes didn't fade. She remembered what her father once told her during her first year of pilot school. Your silence must be louder than their noise, not out of weakness, but because you hold the whole sky. Let them chatter, you fly. But he hadn't sat between two strangers while his dignity was carved into pieces. He hadn't had to carry generations of expectation on his shoulders, then be told, without words, that he was still too much or not enough, or both. The flight attendant passed again, handing out warm towels with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She avoided Naomi's row completely, skipping over them as if the section didn't exist. Naomi sat straighter. She didn't need the towel. She didn't need comfort. But the exclusion stung more than she expected. This is what they do, she thought. Isolate you just enough that you question your right to speak. And still, no one said a word. Not the passengers, not the crew. Whitmore had returned to reading a hardback business memoir, one ankle resting casually on his opposite knee. He looked exactly like someone who had erased an inconvenience from his day, and was rewarded for it. Naomi folded her arms, not out of defiance, but to hold something inside from spilling out. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She retrieved it slowly, careful not to elbow the sleeping man beside her. One notification blinked. Private message from CrewLink, encrypted. She tapped it open. Maria R., Flight 742. Crew, Captain Carter, I'm so sorry. I recognized you right away. I didn't say anything because Mr. Whitmore is, well, management says not to cross him. But I just wanted you to know, you weren't invisible to everyone. Naomi read the message twice. She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she opened her notepad app and wrote a single line. Record every detail. Not to retaliate, but to remember. Because silence today will echo tomorrow. She closed her eyes again, not to rest, but to recenter. Her father's voice echoed in her memory once more. Some fights you win in the air, others you win by outlasting the storm. The storm had just begun, and Naomi was still flying. Captain Richard Monroe had flown for 38 years. His instinct for trouble, like weather radar, was sharp, silent, and unrelenting. And right now, something didn't sit right. It wasn't turbulence or tech. It was the nagging dissonance between the manifest and what his eyes had just seen during a casual walk past the cockpit divider before takeoff. The first officer assigned to this flight, Flight 742, Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., was listed as Carter N., a name Monroe recognized instantly. He'd approved her temporary assignment just yesterday, after First Officer Jean Lynn called in sick with a sudden high-grade fever. "No problem," Monroe had told scheduling. "Put Carter in. She's solid." But Carter wasn't in the jump seat when they took off. She wasn't anywhere near the cockpit. He buzzed the intercom. "Senior purser to the flight deck, please." Moments later, Glenn, a seasoned flight attendant with 18 years under his belt, stepped inside. He closed the door behind him carefully. "Yes, Captain?" "Where's Carter?" Monroe asked. Glenn blinked. "Carter?" "First Officer Carter. Naomi Carter. She's assigned to this flight. Not jump seating, not deadheading. She's supposed to be flying it." Glenn hesitated. "Oh, Captain, she's actually back in business class. Seat 4C, I think." Monroe turned slowly. "Why is my co-pilot sitting in 4C?" Glenn's mouth twitched, but he didn't answer. "Speak, Glenn." "She boarded early and took seat 1A, but there was a disagreement." "Disagreement with who?" "Passenger in 1A, Mr. Douglas Whitmore, Platinum executive. He claimed the seat was his. There was confusion. She offered to move to avoid escalation." Monroe's jaw tightened. "She offered?" he repeated. "You're telling me a pilot assigned to this flight was removed from first-class seating on her own flight because a passenger didn't like the look of her?" Glenn looked down. "Yes, sir." Monroe didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Get her up here," he said. Naomi's eyes fluttered open as she heard her name. Glenn's face appeared in the aisle, pale and flustered. "Captain Monroe is requesting you in the flight deck," he said, almost whispering. Naomi blinked in surprise. "Now?" "Yes, he's just learned, well, he just realized." "It's okay," she said quietly, rising. The two men beside her shifted uncomfortably to let her through. One murmured something that sounded vaguely apologetic. She didn't respond. As she followed Glenn to the front, whispers sparked like static behind her. Passengers who had watched her demotion from 1A now saw her walk toward the cockpit. Some blinked in confusion. A few leaned into the aisles, trying to get a better look. In 1A, Douglas Whitmore's legs were still stretched arrogantly. He glanced up as Naomi passed and gave a single, smug nod, mistaking her summons as further discipline. Naomi said nothing. She stepped through the door and into the cockpit. Captain Monroe turned from his seat, gray eyebrows raised. "Took me longer than I'd like to connect the dots," he said. "Welcome aboard, First Officer Carter. Hope your arm's not broken. We've got 700 miles of night sky to run." She felt something small and solid return to her chest. Familiarity, authority. "Yes, Captain," she said smoothly, sliding into her seat. Monroe handed her the checklist. "We've been at cruising altitude for 15 minutes. Cabin's quiet. Weather's clean till DC. You good to take controls for an hour?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Gladly." She adjusted her headset and began scanning the instruments. Within seconds, her world narrowed to switches, gauges, altitude charts, radio frequencies. This was home. This was hers. Monroe let out a satisfied breath. "I heard about what happened. Glenn told me." Naomi didn't respond. Monroe continued, voice low but firm. "You handled it with more grace than I would have. But let me make something clear. This cockpit, it's yours as much as it's mine. Nobody questions your rank here. Not passengers, not crew, not management." Naomi nodded once. "Understood, sir." Silence settled. Comfortable this time. The lights of Colorado blinked faintly far below. Back in the cabin, the shift had begun. Subtle, but real. A teenage boy in row 5, who'd secretly Googled Naomi Carter after hearing her name, whispered to his mother, "Mom, she's the pilot." The woman raised her brows. "Are you sure?" "She's on Global's website. She's a captain. She's flying this plane." The woman looked down the aisle, then toward 1A, where Douglas Whitmore now looked considerably less smug. A ripple passed through the rows. The man who had filmed earlier leaned over to the woman next to him. "Do you think I should post the video?" The woman hesitated, Only if you're ready for it to blow up. He nodded, thumb hovering over the upload button. In business class, the two men who had boxed Naomi in now exchanged glances. One cleared his throat. "Did you hear she's actually the pilot?" The other looked away, ashamed. "I didn't know." In the cockpit, Naomi held the controls with steady hands. Outside, the stars wheeled above them, silent witnesses. Inside, hope stirred. Not from revenge, not from exposure, but from a different kind of visibility. The kind earned in silence, in endurance, in sky. Naomi adjusted her headset in the cockpit, eyes sweeping the horizon as Captain Monroe leaned back slightly in his seat, giving her full control. It was a simple maneuver, altitude hold, heading stable, tailwinds favorable. But her thoughts weren't in the sky. They were back in first class. More precisely, in seat 1A, Douglas Whitmore. There was something gnawing at her, a mental itch that hadn't let go since she'd heard his name. She had dismissed him initially, a corporate blowhard clinging to his legacy seat, an inflated ego. But now, inside the cockpit, with time to think and space to breathe, details began to click together like landing gear locking into place. Whitmore wasn't just another entitled executive. His name had crossed her desk before. Years ago, before she had transitioned fully into aviation, Naomi had worked as a cyber analyst for a classified division linked to her father's former agency, Contacts. She wasn't just the daughter of Samuel Carter. For a time, she was his understudy, trained not only in surveillance analysis, but in what her father had called the art of pattern disruption. She tapped her tablet beside the throttle and brought up a secure system she hadn't accessed in over a year, Orion Node. The interface flickered to life, demanding biometric confirmation. She pressed her thumb to the scanner and whispered the passphrase, "Permission, Echo 7-1. Green light. Monroe glanced sideways. "Something wrong?" "Just checking the weather pattern," she said lightly. He nodded and returned to skimming the flight bulletin. Inside Orion Node, Naomi keyed in a search. Douglas M. Whitmore. Affiliations, flagged accounts, international alerts. She expected nothing. Maybe a financial profile, a board membership. What she got made her blood run cold. Confidential, classified interagency flag. Level 3, red. Subject, Douglas M. Whitmore. Origin, FBI/Department of Treasury, Interpol. Active investigation, transatlantic shell transfers. Allegations, money laundering, offshore account structuring, pre-extradition asset relocation. Priority risk, suspected use of business class travel to exit jurisdiction prior to subpoena enforcement. Last movement, scheduled departure, Flight 742, LAX to IAD, under legal monitoring hold. Status, do not alert subject, surveillance active. Naomi stared at the screen. Her breath caught. Whitmore wasn't just escaping discomfort. He was attempting to escape the country. And the aircraft she was now co-piloting was, by accident or by design, his ride out. Her hand hovered over the screen. If she alerted anyone on board, it could compromise the investigation. But letting him land in DC, unimpeded, felt like betrayal. She opened a secure channel, one her father had helped her build long ago. It tunneled through redundant encryption points, impossible to trace. She tapped out a message. To OPSA. Aegis. Private node. Carter Legacy Relay. Urgent. Onboard Flight 742. Confirmed. D. Whitmore. Exec Class, Seat 1A. Is current transnational financial suspect. Cross-check with FBI liaison. Carter Alpha request. Do you want him airborne or grounded? She hit send. Response ETA, 4 minutes. Captain Monroe gave her a look. Everything good? Copy that, Naomi said, forcing a smile. Just thinking through approach vector options. Monroe raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Inside, her thoughts thundered. Whitmore. International laundering, likely attempting to land in D.C., vanish through corporate channels, shift funds to Luxembourg. It was a pattern she'd seen before. High-level executives slipped between borders before subpoenas could be served. Once in Europe, with the right banking partners, they became ghosts. The cockpit suddenly felt tighter. Her watch buzzed softly. One vibration. Encrypted reply. She opened the new message on the Orion node screen. Response from Ops. Aegis. Confirmed. Whitmore under dual jurisdiction watch. Warrant delayed due to internal leak. Directive. Hold in transit. Delay disembarkment. Ground intercept team rerouted to IAD. ETA. Sync with gate arrival. She exhaled slowly. No confrontation needed. Just time. And discretion. Naomi turned back to the flight systems. Checked their position. Recalculated descent timeline. She glanced at the passenger manifest again. Whitmore's name now burning like a red light across her vision. He thought he had slipped away. That his insult had pushed her aside. Instead, he had placed himself in her sky. On her aircraft. In her reach. And the moment they landed, he'd be met by men in suits who didn't ask for boarding passes. Back in the cabin, Whitmore sipped another glass of bourbon, chuckling at a text from someone named Stanley, Zurich. He looked like a man at peace. In the cockpit, Naomi kept her hands steady on the controls, guiding the plane through altitude shift, wind resistance, and fate. Estimated time to descent? Monroe asked casually. Naomi's voice was calm, confident. 27 minutes, she said. Copy that, he replied. But Naomi wasn't watching the clock. She was watching justice take flight. Naomi Coleman didn't walk back to seat 1A alone. She returned flanked by the captain. Not because she demanded it, not because protocol required it, but because something had shifted in the cabin, and everyone felt it. The lights hadn't changed. The announcement hadn't blared. But the system knew, and the captain understood. After decades in the air, he'd never seen a passenger's bracelet hijack navigation overrides. That wasn't aviation tech. That was federal tier-grade clearance. So he walked with her, not as a superior, but as someone who now answered to her. Naomi said nothing as they moved. Her face was unreadable, calm, controlled. But her steps were precise, her posture exact. Every eye in the first-class cabin tracked her return. Some with awe, some with discomfort, some, like Erica Wallace, with palpable dread. But Naomi didn't look at Erica. She didn't look at anyone. She simply took her seat, refastened the belt, and nodded once to the captain. He nodded back, then disappeared behind the locked cockpit door. Seconds later, the cabin speakers hissed, then played the standard chime, but altered slightly in pitch. The crew recognized it immediately. Protocol redirection, an unspoken alert that the chain of command had shifted. The other attendants responded. Silently, orders came not through loud commands, but subtle cues. A glance, a gesture, a head nod from the crew's lead, now following Naomi's indirect signals. Even Evelyn Moore, who remained seated 2 rows behind, caught it. Naomi hadn't revealed who she was, not in name, not in title, but she didn't need to. Douglas Whitmore was watching. At first, his attention had been casual, curious glances between sips of his bourbon. But now, his fingers gripped the armrest too tightly. His foot bounced. He looked at Naomi once, then again. His instincts were kicking in, and they were whispering, danger. He leaned toward the passenger beside him, a portly man who barely glanced up from his tablet, and muttered, "You see what's going on with seat 1A?" The man grunted. Douglas tried again. "Isn't that against protocol? Some VIP hijacking the flight?" No reply. Because the man wasn't just any traveler. His name tag read S.D. Quinn. He'd boarded last, just after final call. Sat alone. Didn't order a drink. Didn't remove his jacket. Didn't blink when the override began. Now, he glanced up slowly and offered Douglas a thin smile. "You fly often, Mr. Whitmore?" Douglas's eyes narrowed. "Do I know you?" "No," Quinn said. "But I know you." Douglas froze. The man leaned closer, voice low. "Funny thing about offshore trusts. They're not so offshore when the hosting firm cuts a side deal with the IRS." Douglas's face drained of color. "I'm not here for you," Quinn continued, still smiling. "But if you move suddenly or speak to the wrong person, I might be." He looked toward Naomi. Douglas followed his gaze and realized something chilling. Naomi hadn't said a word to him, but the entire cabin was now moving to her rhythm. A tray shifted here. A curtain closed there. Passengers were no longer just passengers. At least 4 of them had that look. Federal, but dressed as ordinary. He cursed internally. This wasn't a glitch in control. This was a trap, and he was sitting in the middle of it. Across the aisle, Marisol quietly handed Naomi a sealed envelope. It had no markings, no stamp, but inside was a manifest. Something pulled from the backup comms after the override. Naomi scanned it quickly. Her eyes stopped at seat 3F. Douglas M. Whitmore. Occupation, philanthropic consultant, forwarding reason. Last-minute ticket request, approved via override, internal airline authorization. Naomi's eyes narrowed. She scribbled a short note on the back of the manifest and passed it back to Marisol. 3 minutes later, the beverage cart stopped by 3F. "Another bourbon, sir?" Douglas looked up, hesitated. "Sure," Marisol smiled. "Complimentary. Just wanted to thank you for your patience." She poured, passed the drink, and walked away. Douglas held the glass, then froze. At the bottom, in the ice, something floated. A sliver of waterproof polymer, no larger than a dime. A message. He tilted the glass slightly and read, "You were flagged before you boarded. They let you in to watch what you do next. Consider staying quiet." He looked up. Naomi was staring straight ahead. Not at him, but he knew. She knew. He downed the bourbon in one gulp and slumped back. In the rear galley, Marisol turned to Evelyn. "He's rattled." Evelyn nodded. "He should be." Marisol hesitated. "Why let him board at all?" Evelyn replied. "Because sometimes watching the spider walk into the web tells us more than catching it in a jar." Back in 1A, Naomi adjusted her bracelet. Its glow returned to soft white. Her fingers drummed against the armrest once, twice, then stilled. Phase 1, containment, complete. Now came Phase 2, exposure. No one was ready when she stood. Not the passengers, already dazed from the past hour of invisible chess moves. Not the crew, still orbiting around silent commands. Not even Douglas Whitmore, who had been shrinking into seat 3F like a man watching his own noose lower inch by inch. Naomi Coleman unbuckled her belt with a quiet click. She rose to her feet, straightened her vest, adjusted her bracelet, and turned. The screen above seat 1A blinked. Then again. Cabin-wide, every monitor synced and switched from idle mode to a live feed. The angle? Slightly elevated, center-aligned. It was Naomi standing before them. Live. She didn't speak for 5 seconds. It was intentional. A pause designed to reclaim silence. Not from fear, but from noise. And then, "My name is Naomi Coleman." Gasps rippled through the rows. The flight crew, the captain, and the Federal Protection Service already know this. But I'm stating it now for the sake of clarity, transparency, and for the legal record being compiled aboard this flight. She clasped her hands behind her back. Calm, centered. "I am the Acting Deputy Director of Ethical Intelligence Protocol under the Federal Oversight Council. You may also know me as the founder of NovaMind Systems, former advisor to the Joint Senate Committee on Autonomous Security. My presence on this flight was unlisted for reasons of national discretion." Every head turned. Someone whispered, "That's why she was the one they tried to smear last year." The whispers surged. Astonishment, recognition, awe. Some passengers reached for their phones, then froze, remembering the system lock. Naomi continued, voice even. Earlier on this flight, an incident occurred involving my removal from my designated seat and an act of physical aggression by a member of the crew. What followed was a series of federal escalation protocols triggered by biometric distress signals. The current system override is not malicious, it is lawful and protective. She scanned the cabin slowly. Then, I've returned control of basic functions to the captain, but critical systems remain under watch. That will not change until the aircraft is safely grounded and federal debriefing is complete. She paused. In short, you are safe. Applause didn't come. Not yet. The cabin was still stunned. But the respect was palpable. Even Erica Wallace, now pale and trembling in the galley, looked as though she might crumble. That's when the twist came. A hand raised in row 5. It was the man who had been live streaming earlier. Clean-shaven, late 30s, wearing a Patagonia jacket and an opportunist smile. "Ms. Coleman," he said loudly, "I think I speak for everyone when I say, thank you. That was powerful, inspiring." Naomi nodded slightly. He smiled wider. "And because I happen to have recorded most of this, the slap, the override, your speech, I'd like to share it with the world. People need to see what happened here, right?" Murmurs of tentative agreement floated through the air. The man added quickly, "I already posted a teaser clip. Got 500,000 views in 20 minutes. Naomi tilted her head. "And your name, sir?" He stood, as if for a curtain call. "Tyler Grant, independent journalist, Grant Media Collective. We're all about truth and exposure." Naomi nodded slowly. "And compensation?" Tyler blinked. "I'm sorry?" She looked him dead in the eye. "How much did you ask Delta Airlines to pay you to not publish that video?" The entire cabin froze. Tyler's smile faltered. I'm not sure what you mean." Evelyn Moore rose in row 4, holding a tablet. She tapped it once. The screen displayed an email time-stamped 30 minutes earlier, routed from Tyler, grant@gmcnews.org to Delta Legal Operations. Subject, content hold opportunity, Flight 119 incident. "I have clear HD footage of the slap, system failure, and Ms. Coleman's identity. I believe this could reflect poorly on Delta. We're open to a private agreement, 6-figure range, NDA optional." Gasps erupted. Naomi folded her arms. "Truth and exposure?" Tyler turned red. "That email was exploratory. I wasn't—" She held up a hand. "Enough." She turned to Claire. "Please forward this packet to the FBI office awaiting our landing. Flag it as attempted extortion involving federal protocol disruption." Claire nodded, already typing. Naomi looked back at Tyler. "You won't be walking off this flight." The applause started slowly, then grew. Not wild cheering, but that firm, grounded, righteous clap of people who had seen injustice diffused, power wielded responsibly, and a scammer exposed. Douglas Whitmore's jaw clenched. He looked down at the drink in his hand and realized something terrifying. He was now the second most endangered man on this plane. Naomi sat back down without fanfare. She didn't bow. She didn't grandstand. But as she settled into 1A again, for the first time since the flight began, everyone knew who really ran this cabin. And Douglas? He finally understood. This wasn't turbulence. This was a storm sent specifically for him. The private call came 20 minutes after Naomi's broadcast. Claire handed her the encrypted phone without a word. The connection was routed through 5 firewalls, 1 quantum verification layer, and a signal obfuscation protocol known only to Tier 1 operatives. But the voice on the other end was clear, smooth, corporate, familiar. "Naomi," said the woman, her tone almost maternal, "you've been quite the trending name tonight." Naomi leaned back in seat 1A, eyes locked on the frozen screen in front of her. "I didn't intend to trend," she replied flatly. There was a chuckle. "No one ever does. But let's get to it. You're a strategic asset, not just to Nova Mind, not just to the Council, but to us. And we need you to help manage the optics." Naomi didn't blink. "Go on. We've drafted a statement. Nothing dramatic, Just a short video, 45 seconds, a message of clarity, unity, humility. You'd acknowledge the misunderstandings aboard Flight 119, express regret for the disruption, praise the professionalism of our crew, mention how Erica Wallace's response, though flawed, came from a place of urgency. Naomi's fingers twitched. "Did I hear that right?" she asked softly. "You want me to praise the woman who struck a federal minor?" A pause. The voice lowered. "Naomi, optics are everything. The footage is already leaking. We can't control the entire narrative, but we can redirect it. Make you the anchor point. The peacemaker." Naomi exhaled. "You want me to apologize?" "To de-escalate," the voice corrected gently. "This doesn't have to be a battle. Be gracious. Be composed. Be the face that calms the tide." Something twisted in Naomi's chest. Not anger, not yet. It was something older, something colder, betrayal. "I see," she said. "And in return?" "Discretion, support, media freeze. We'll handle the fallout. Delta retains you as goodwill ambassador. We even expedite Novamind's license renewal for federal contracts." That's when Naomi finally understood. They didn't call to support her. They called to use her. Again, her name, her story, her pain. All packaged and polished to protect a trillion-dollar system that would never stand up for her the way she just stood up for a child. Naomi didn't reply immediately. She turned to Claire. "Open the protected node. Route this call to the captain's cabin and the internal crew log. I want every word archived." Claire hesitated, then nodded, fingers flying. Naomi returned to the call. "You know," she said, her voice now harder, "when Erica hit that boy, you didn't call. When I triggered Code Blue, you didn't call. When I exposed the attempted extortion, nothing. But now that the public's watching, now I matter again." The voice tried to recover. "That's not—" Naomi cut her off. "Save it." Then she dropped the bomb. "I'm forwarding this conversation to the FAA, the DOJ, and the Oversight Ethics Board, along with metadata logs showing how long your legal team sat on that footage before I spoke. You didn't just stay silent, you were waiting to sell me to the press." Silence. Then a sharper voice broke in. Male, impatient, clearly patched into the line. "Ms. Coleman, if you escalate this—" "Too late," Naomi snapped. "You already did." She ended the call. Claire looked at her wide-eyed. "Was that Delta Executive Council?" "And internal PR, with a side of corporate blackmail," Naomi said coolly. The screen in front of her flickered again. Another press draft had arrived. This one wasn't even subtle. Naomi Coleman, speaking from Flight 119, expresses deep sorrow for misunderstandings that led to a regrettable overreaction. She closed the file. No one spoke, until Evelyn, seated behind her, leaned forward and said quietly, "You know what this means, don't you?" Naomi nodded. "It means they never cared about justice, only leverage." Evelyn's voice dropped. "If you go public with this, you won't be the story anymore." "I know. You'll be the enemy." Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "Then let them fear me properly." Meanwhile, back in 3F, Douglas Whitmore received a message of his own from an encrypted server, addressed directly to his burner phone. "Package update. Naomi Coleman no longer under containment. Shift all assets to contingency. Prepare Phase 3. He closed the screen, heart thudding. So, the rumors were true. She was no longer just a nuisance. She was a threat. He looked forward, past the passengers, toward the woman in 1A who had, in less than 2 hours, unraveled layers of power most men never saw. And still, she sat there, calm, poised, as though nothing had happened. He wondered, briefly, if she knew what she'd just ignited. Because Naomi Coleman didn't just refuse a bribe, she'd just told the world, "You don't own me." And now, the system would fight back. The memory came back like lightning, unbidden, sharp, and clear. Her father, Jonathan Coleman, sitting on the porch in his old Navy pea coat, handing her a thin silver drive the day before he died. "Don't use this unless the system tries to use you," he'd said. "And if they ever do, don't ask permission." Naomi hadn't asked. Not when she first exposed biometric bias in federal surveillance. Not when Nova Mind was almost blacklisted. And not when he died and the silence from Washington was louder than any funeral choir. But now, with the voice of Delta's legal team still echoing in her ear and Douglas Whitmore watching her every move from row 3F like a man measuring targets, she knew. It was time. She reached into the lining of her travel case, fingers brushing the hidden pocket. The drive was still there, wrapped in wax cloth, unmarked. She plugged it into the side of her seat console. Not the entertainment system, but the auxiliary port that only Tier 1 flights even included. The interface blinked once, then booted. No menu. Just a question. Activate Shadow Protocol? Confirmation code required. Naomi hesitated, then typed JSeol 1973 Flux. The screen flickered. Lines of code rushed across the screen. And then, a map. Not of the world, but of systems. Lines crisscrossed through invisible channels. Nodes within aviation networks, legacy telecommunications links, deep-tier satellite mirrors, encrypted pathways seeded decades earlier. It was a skeleton system, one her father had built over the course of 30 years in defense comms, homeland integration, and aviation security. Naomi's breath caught. She'd always thought he exaggerated, that his talk of off-grid fallback nets and fail-over alliances was nostalgia mixed with paranoia. She was wrong. It was all real. And it was live. The nodes pulsed, waiting. She selected one marked Virgil tag. Jacob Wren, independent investigative journalist, level Omega Trust. The screen opened a secure line. The response came in 7 seconds. A man's voice, raspy, aged, but alert. "Tell me you're not calling me from a plane, Naomi." She smiled for the first time in hours. "Hey, Jake." "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "The last time I heard that tone, your father was testifying in front of 5 senators who hated him." "Guess some things don't change," he paused. "You running his protocol?" Naomi's voice lowered. "I had to." A beat of silence. Then he said, "How bad?" "They tried to bribe me to cover up an assault. Federal alert went public. One of the passengers is dirty, probably black ops or worse. The airline's folding, PR spinning, and now they want me to smile for the camera while they wipe my blood off their floors." Jake whistled low. "You always did underplay things." She chuckled. "I learned from the best." Another pause. "You need air cover?" he asked. "No," Naomi replied. "I need light." Jake understood. He'd once uncovered a smuggling ring inside an aid organization. Another time, he brought down a pharmaceutical giant hiding cancer trial deaths. His stories weren't clickbait. They were crackbait, the kind that split open walls and let the rot show. Now, Naomi needed him to do it again. "Sending you the whole archive," she said. "Flight logs, audio, override sequences, boardroom audio, even legal comms. Blow it up." Jake's voice dropped. "And the boy? He's safe. For now. But the fact that someone allowed Whitmore on this flight means this isn't just a PR cover-up. It's a trial balloon. They were testing what they could get away with." Jake muttered a curse. "I'm activating the old relay," he added. "Rex in London, Kayla in Oakland. I'll route the narrative around the usual media filters. You'll have global traction in under 6 hours. 3, Naomi said. Jake laughed. "Damn, you've grown sharper than your father." She smiled. Then his voice changed, softer, rougher. "He'd be proud of you, Naomi." That nearly broke her, but she didn't let it. She ended the call with a final word. "Let the world see." Claire was watching her from across the aisle. "You really did it?" she whispered. "You just lit the fuse." Naomi nodded. "The only way to kill a shadow system," she said, "is to cast a brighter one." The drive ejected itself. The port reset. Nothing visible remained, but the ripple had already begun. In row 3F, Douglas Whitmore felt his phone buzz again. He unlocked it. A private comm from an anonymous source. She opened the protocol. "Renz is in. Your window is closing." He looked up. Naomi was watching him now. Not smiling, but not afraid. She didn't have to be, because this time, she had the light. And for the first time, Douglas realized he was standing on a battlefield built by her father, defended by her hand and now burning under her signal. The leak hit the internet at 6:04 a.m. EST, not through Tyler Grant, not via some blurry handheld viral clip. This was clean, stabilized, with synchronized cabin audio, annotated captions, and source authentication embedded in metadata. And it didn't just show the slap, it showed everything. From Erica Wallace's initial sneer when Noah boarded, to Douglas Whitmore's fake concern, to the exact moment Naomi's bracelet activated the override protocol, frame by frame, cut with legal timestamps and chain of command notations. It was surgical and devastating. The video had clearly been pulled from internal cabin surveillance, meaning whoever released it had access to encrypted flight systems, systems supposedly only monitored post-landing. The title? Flight 119, When the System Looked Away. It spread like wildfire. Within 30 minutes, it was trending on X, Reddit, and 3 separate closed channels used by investigative journalists. The hashtags followed immediately. Noah was there, #Tier 1 Truth, #Coleman Override, #Flying While Black. But it was the content that silenced the internet, because this wasn't just about a slap. It was about a coordinated failure. From the moment Noah was dismissed as a child in the wrong seat, to the crew's willful ignorance of his bracelet's Tier 1 designation, to the company's secret attempt to coerce Naomi into apologizing on behalf of her own abuse. The footage showed it all. And at minute 7:42, the twist detonated. Douglas Whitmore, clearly visible in the left aisle, was caught leaning toward Erica and muttering, "Let him squirm a little longer. Nothing teaches faster than a public lesson." Zoom, enhance, clarify. His voice, his face, his words. Weaponized humiliation. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't in-flight misunderstanding. It wasn't security confusion. It wasn't an isolated error. It was systemic. At the FBI's National Cyber Division in Quantico, the alert hit Director Lee Morrison's desk in under an hour. She scrolled through the footage in silence, eyes narrowing at the audio transcript. Then she looked at the list of flagged names cross-referenced with open intelligence dossiers. Douglas Whitmore's popped up immediately. 3 sealed investigations. Offshore accounts under alternate spellings. Connections to shell lobbying firms, including one tied to airline unions. And now, caught on tape as an instigator in a federal protection breach. She made one call. "Activate Oversight Channel 9. I want Whitmore picked up for questioning before wheels down. If anyone tries to intercept that order, elevate it straight to DOJ." The agent on the line replied, "He's on Flight 119, Director." Morrison smirked. "Then we'll be waiting at the gate." Back in the skies, Flight 119 sailed over the Atlantic under a sky too clear to match the storm it carried. Naomi sat quietly in 1A, watching her plan unfold on screen. Jake Renz had done his job. Not just leak the video, but authenticate it, amplify it, frame it with precision. He'd planted it not just in media circles, but in forums where whistleblowers lived, where ex-security officers and airline union defectors gathered. The narrative wasn't about Naomi anymore. It was about every unspoken bias, every corporate cover-up, every abused protocol that left the vulnerable unprotected and the powerful untouched. Claire turned to her. "It's everywhere," she said softly. "Even legacy outlets are running it without commentary. No spin, just footage." Naomi nodded. "That was the only way to win," she said. "No outrage, just facts." "People are outraged anyway," Claire said. "I know," Naomi whispered. but now they're outraged on the record. In 3F, Douglas Whitmore sat stone still. His phone had died, not from battery loss, from a system-wide lock. Federal hold, active investigation, device disabled. He stared at the blank screen for 10 full seconds before letting it fall to the carpeted floor. He looked forward again and saw Naomi watching him, not smiling, just steady. Douglas knew he couldn't stand, couldn't speak, couldn't run. The cabin wasn't just full of passengers anymore, it was full of witnesses. And as far as the law was concerned, Flight 119 was now a federal event. Down on the ground, Delta's corporate HQ in Atlanta lit up like a Christmas tree. Every terminal buzzed with alerts, press inquiries, legal threats, and investor panic. The executive board held an emergency session. One director threw his phone across the room. Another resigned mid-call. But it was the compliance officer who said it out loud. "We tried to silence the woman who saved a federal miner. Now the world knows." There was only one word left to describe the moment. Collapse. In the sky, Naomi closed her eyes. For the first time since the flight began, she allowed herself a breath of relief. Not because the danger had passed, but because the silence was finally over. The world wasn't fixed, but now, it couldn't pretend it didn't know. The landing at Heathrow was the quietest part of Flight 119. No announcements of arrival, no polite round of applause, just the subtle shudder of tires against tarmac, the soft exhale of cabin pressure, and the collective realization that something profound had just happened above the clouds. When the wheels touched down, the system didn't welcome passengers to London. It issued a final message. Flight 119 has completed federal override sequence. Please remain seated until further instructions from onboard security personnel. Then, the seatbelt chime. One final exclamation mark on an airborne reckoning. The first to be removed wasn't Naomi. It was Douglas Whitmore. Two plainclothes agents boarded through the front. They didn't announce their names, didn't show badges, just walked directly to 3F and stopped. "Mr. Whitmore," the taller one said, "we need you to come with us." Douglas stood slowly. His face was pale, expression unreadable, but his hands shook when he reached for the overhead compartment. The second agent gently pushed it closed. "No carry-on, sir." Passengers watched silently as he was led out of the aircraft. No applause, just the slow turning of heads, like watching the final scene of a crime drama play out in real time. Next came the so-called journalist. Tyler Grant was escorted off 2 minutes later, this time not by agents, but by Delta's legal representatives, already serving him with a civil injunction for attempted extortion and defamation under the False Crisis Monetization Act. He tried to object, to explain, to reframe, but the crew's video footage, his own email, and Naomi's decision to leak everything made him a non-story before his statement even began. Back at Delta HQ, things unraveled fast. The CEO resigned within 48 hours, publicly citing health concerns, privately forced out by a board now bleeding billions in stock value and facing class action lawsuits from passenger rights groups, child protection alliances, and civil rights watchdogs. The FAA announced a comprehensive audit of all Delta security and crew protocols within the week. Other airlines scrambled to update training manuals, even before the mandates came down. But the surprise came when Naomi refused all honors. No award, no medal, no press conference. When offered a ceremonial seat on the FAA advisory board, she declined. "I'm not interested in being a symbol," she said. "I'm interested in rewriting the system." And that's exactly what she did. 1 week later, she walked into the Eisenhower Federal Auditorium in DC, not in designer heels, but in her standard black flats and tailored blazer, holding a thin tablet and flanked by Claire and Evelyn. The room was full. Senators, agency heads, airline CEOs, education leaders, journalists, activists. Naomi stepped up to the podium. The silence was electric. Then she spoke. "There's something worse than a system that fails." Pause. It's a system that learns how to fail quietly. Her voice was steady, firm, unwavering. What happened on Flight 119 wasn't an accident. It was a pattern, the kind that's been practiced so long it became invisible, until a child wore a bracelet bright enough to expose it. She tapped her tablet. Behind her, a screen lit up with the title, The Coleman Code, a federal ethics framework for aviation personnel. Naomi continued, "This is not just a report. It is a proposed federal directive, crafted in collaboration with oversight boards, security ethicists, civil rights experts, and most importantly, crew members who've been silenced, ignored, or pushed out for trying to speak up." The document contained a required federal-level ethics certification for all cabin crew, whistleblower protection for staff who report racial bias or abuse, a real-time AI-assisted passenger monitoring tool that flags potential profiling behavior, not passengers, but crew conduct, an anonymous escalation channel that bypasses airline management and routes directly to the FAA's Ethical Review Board, a standing Tier 1 response team of trained liaisons to manage flights involving minors with federal status, and most importantly, the creation of a crew ethics fund, federally sponsored, to subsidize training for airlines that agree to adopt the framework without delay. Accountability, Naomi said, shouldn't depend on the size of your PR team. It should depend on the size of your conscience. The room broke into applause. Sustained, earnest. No one stood because it was expected. They stood because they understood. Naomi wasn't reforming policy. She was changing a culture. Evelyn Moore approached Naomi after the session. "I told your father once that you were too idealistic," she said. Naomi smiled. "He probably agreed." "He didn't," Evelyn said softly. "He told me that idealism was only dangerous when you gave it a microphone, and you just gave it a federal mandate." Naomi looked out across the Capitol. "Then let's make sure it echoes." By the end of the month, 6 airlines had signed on. By the end of the year, 15 nations expressed interest in adopting similar frameworks for international flights. The FAA formally named the initiative the Coleman Directive. And Naomi? She went back to work, not as a figurehead, but as an architect. Because to her, victory wasn't a headline. It was a system that couldn't forget. 2 months after Flight 119, Naomi Coleman was back at work. No red carpets, no security escort, no podiums or golden plaques. Just the quiet hum of Nova Mind's training lab in Arlington, Virginia. The place where she had started designing AI frameworks for adaptive education at 27, and where she still came in 3 mornings a week. Coffee in hand, coat slung over one shoulder, wristband turned off. Her office hadn't changed. Still minimalist, still neat, still framed with photos of student pilots and engineers she'd helped sponsor over the years. Not because it made good press, but because no one else would. She moved through the building like a current, soft, steady, focused. Her team noticed the difference, of course. Not in her walk, but in the way others walked around her, with more reverence now, with a quieter kind of attention. Some couldn't quite meet her eyes without blinking. After all, she'd just rewritten policy at 36,000 feet. And yet, if you asked Naomi, she'd say she was just glad Noah got home safe. The invitation to appear on national television came from The Forum, one of the few long-form interview programs still respected across political lines. Their message was simple. "We'd like to talk about Flight 119, about what you endured and what you've built." Naomi hesitated. She didn't want to relive it. Not again. Not with edits and dramatic music and B-roll footage of the slap replayed on loop. But then she thought of the little girls watching. The ones like she used to be. Smart, quiet, overlooked. Girls who learned to sit smaller. Girls who watched their mothers get spoken over. Girls who got called too intense when they asked real questions. She accepted. The studio was quiet when she arrived. No live audience. Just the host, Marcia Kent, and a camera crew who all looked at Naomi like they weren't quite sure how to begin. She wore gray slacks, a navy blouse, and her father's old wristwatch. No makeup team, no pre-interview rehearsal. Just her story. Unfiltered. They rolled cameras. Kent smiled. "Naomi Coleman," she began. "You've been called many things in the past 60 days. Whistleblower, reformer, hero. How do you see yourself?" Naomi tilted her head. "Grounded," she said. A pause. "Because you've been through hell and back?" "No," Naomi replied gently. "Because I know what happens when the ground beneath you suddenly gives way. You don't scream, you don't flail. You fly, because it's the only way to survive." Kent blinked. Naomi continued. "I didn't win anything on Flight 1019. I didn't defeat a villain or outsmart a system. What I did was make a promise. To a child who had been hurt, and to the millions who have been hurt the same way, quietly, daily, invisibly. I promised that next time we'd be ready." Kent leaned in. "And are you?" Naomi smiled. "We're getting there." Then came the real reason for her appearance. Naomi turned toward the camera. "Most people know I came from a modest background. What they don't know is that my mother worked nights cleaning airplanes. She'd come home smelling like jet fuel. And every night she'd tell me, 'One day, baby, you'll ride up front.'" She took a breath. This fall, Novamind, through a public-private partnership with the FAA and educational equity funds, is launching the Ascend Initiative, a nationwide pilot scholarship program for girls of color between the ages of 10 and 17. We're not just teaching them to fly. We're showing them they were always meant to. The studio went still. Naomi looked directly into the lens. "To every girl who's been told she's too loud, too quiet, too bossy, too sensitive, too anything to belong in the cockpit or the boardroom, I'm telling you now, the sky doesn't care who doubts you. It only responds to those who rise." The segment aired on a Thursday. By Friday morning, applications to Ascend tripled expectations. School districts from Detroit to Dallas sent in requests. Former pilots volunteered to mentor. Retired black women aviators offered to donate their flight hours. Airlines began calling with funding. But the real moment came later that week. At a small airfield in Maryland, Naomi stood next to a girl named Jada, who had written her an email that simply read, "I didn't know I was allowed to be big until I saw you be quiet and win." They walked toward a Cessna. Jada asked, "Are you scared when you fly?" Naomi smiled. "Sometimes. Even now? Especially now." Jada frowned. "But you don't look scared." Naomi knelt to her level. "You don't have to look scared," she said. "You just have to know you're ready." Then she opened the door. Jada climbed in. Naomi climbed in after. And as the engine started and the small plane lifted into a golden late afternoon sky, the world below blurred into watercolor. But the message was clear. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to fight to be fierce. You don't need to destroy the system to remake it. You just need to fly higher than the people who want to keep you small. And once you do, you don't come back down.